You want to know what I remember most about that night? Not the cold, not the snow, not even the sound of it, though that comes back sometimes, usually around 3 in the morning when the house is quiet and I can't make it stop. What I remember most is the weight of the bag. 42 rounds of .338 Lapua Magnum ammunition, each one roughly 22 grams. Do the math and it doesn't sound like much. But when you're carrying them up a frozen hillside in the dark on Christmas Eve, when your hands are shaking and your breath is coming out in these short, ragged little clouds, and you know what those rounds are supposed to do tonight, the weight is something else entirely. It's not just physical. It's the kind of weight that settles somewhere behind your sternum and doesn't move. I keep thinking about how I got there, how any of us get to the moments that define us. My name is Corporal Danny Reyes. At the time of this story, I was 26 years old, attached to a joint forward support unit operating in a region I'm not going to name because some of those operations are still classified and some of those people are still out there. What I can tell you is that it was winter, real winter, the kind that gets inside your gear no matter how good your gear is, the kind that makes your rifle scope fog and your fingers go half numb even inside your gloves. I was not a sniper. Let me be clear about that right now, because I've heard the version of this story where I'm described as some kind of prodigy, some hidden talent who stepped up and executed a textbook shot under pressure. That's not what happened. What happened is messier than that, and more human, and I think the truth of it matters more than the clean version. I was a logistics specialist. Ammunition, equipment, supply chains. I knew how to move things from one place to another without them getting lost or destroyed, and in a combat support role, that skill is worth more than people give it credit for. I was good at my job. I cared about my job, but I was not trained to do what I ended up doing that night. The man who was trained for it was Master Chief Petty Officer Caleb Wren. I'd only known Wren for about 3 weeks when everything happened. He'd been embedded with our unit as part of a small SEAL element supporting a longer-term operation. He was one of those people you notice immediately, not because he was loud or imposing, though he was physically big, broad through the shoulders with hands that looked like they'd been built for a different era. You noticed him because of the quiet. There was a quality of stillness to him that you don't often see in people. Like he'd made some private peace with the world that the rest of us were still arguing about. He was 38. He had a daughter named Lily who was 7 and a wife named Margaret who was a high school history teacher back in Virginia. He kept a photo of them tucked into the inside cover of a small notebook he carried everywhere. Not digital, actual paper. He'd told me once when I'd asked about it that paper felt more real to him. You lose your phone, he said. The picture's just gone. Paper you have to actually burn. I thought that was either very wise or very old-fashioned, probably both. We talked a lot during those 3 weeks, more than I expected to, given the pace of operations. There were hours of waiting, there always are, and Wren was good company during the waiting. He didn't fill silence with noise the way some people do. He let it sit, and then when he did say something, it was usually worth hearing. He'd been in for 16 years. Had done deployments I won't specify in places I won't name, and he carried all of it in that quiet way of his, the way people carry things when they've decided the carrying is just part of the job. He never talked about anything he'd done in a way that sounded like he wanted credit for it. He talked about his teammates. He talked about decisions. He talked about what it felt like to be responsible for outcomes in situations where the margin for error was so thin you could lose it between one breath and the next. "Do you ever second-guess yourself?" I asked him once. We were sitting in the back of a support vehicle, parked, waiting for a route clearance report. He thought about it for a moment, not the way people think when they're deciding what answer sounds good, the way people think when they're actually looking for the honest one. "Every time," he said, "the second-guessing is part of it. It means you understand the weight of what you're doing. The day you stop second-guessing is the day you've stopped caring, and that's when mistakes happen." I wrote that down later. I still have it. December 24th began the way most operational days began. Briefings, equipment checks, comm checks, more briefings. There was a specific task that night, and Ren's role in it was the one that mattered most. I won't describe the full operational picture, but the short version is this. There was an elevated position that needed to be held and covered, and Ren was the one who was going to hold it. My job was simple. Get the ammunition to the forward cache point before 1800 hours, coordinate with the support element, and stay back at the secondary position. Clear, straightforward, the kind of task I'd done dozens of times. I remember loading the rounds into the pack that afternoon. It was already getting dark. Winter dark comes early at that latitude, and the temperature was dropping hard. I could feel the metal of the ammunition through my gloves when I handled it, that particular cold that metal holds differently than anything else, like it's storing the temperature rather than just carrying it. 42 rounds. I checked each one the way you're trained to. No deformations, no corrosion, clean casing, professional habit. You don't think about what they're for when you're doing this. You think about whether they're right, whether they'll work the way they're supposed to. The thinking about what they're for comes later, usually at night, usually when you can't make it stop. At 17:15, the situation changed. The radio call came through the support element lead, a staff sergeant named Ortega, and the words in it were the kind that rearranged the furniture of the world in about 4 seconds flat. Ren was down. Not dead. I want to be careful here because the word down means different things in different contexts, and what it meant in this context was that he'd taken a fall on the approach route, ice on a traverse that nobody had flagged as compromised, and he'd gone down hard on his left side. Broken collarbone, possible fractured scapula, definitely unable to complete the movement to the elevated position, definitely unable to maintain a firing platform with that shoulder. He was alive. He was being moved back. He was furious about it from what Ortega said. That part, at least, sounded exactly like Ren. The problem was the task still existed, the window still existed, and the elevated position still needed to be covered. I stood there in the cold for a moment, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 30. It's hard to know with the pack of ammunition in my hands, and I ran through what I knew. The position had been mapped. The range cards had been prepared by Ren himself, which meant they were meticulous, the kind of documentation that a good sniper creates so that in the event of exactly this kind of situation, someone else has a fighting chance of executing the task with the information already organized. I knew the position. I'd helped carry equipment to the cache point on a dry run 2 days earlier. I knew the terrain. I also knew I wasn't a sniper. I knew I'd fired a bolt-action precision rifle exactly twice in my life. Once during a cross-training familiarization exercise 8 months earlier, and once as a teenager with my uncle's hunting rifle on a range in New Mexico. I'd hit paper targets both times. Never anything that counted. And yet, I got on the radio. This is Ray's logistics. I need to speak to whoever's coordinating the task element right now. The pause on the other end lasted long enough that I thought maybe the transmission hadn't gone through. Then, go ahead, Rays. Who's covering the elevated position? Another pause, longer this time. We're working on it. Working on it, in operational language, means nobody has an answer yet. It means the gap exists, and everyone can see it, but nobody's stepped into it yet. I said, I'll take the shot. The silence after that was different from the other silences. I heard Ortega breathe out on the comms. I heard, faintly, in the background somewhere, what I later learned was Ren himself, who had apparently been patched in and monitoring, asking someone to get me on with Rays now. His voice, when it came through, was tight with pain and something else, something that was trying very hard to sound like it wasn't fear. Rays, talk to me. What are you basing this on? I told him, the cross-training exercise, the range cards, the fact that I'd been on the terrain, The fact that I had the ammunition already in my hands and nobody else was standing in the gap. He was quiet for a moment. "The range cards are thorough," he said finally. "Every variable is documented. Wind, elevation, temperature corrections. I built them for exactly this situation." A pause. "I didn't build them thinking it would be you." "I know," I said. "You'll need to get to the position in the dark. The approach has compromised ice, the same section that got me. You'll need to go around the eastern." "I have the map." Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly. Quieter, more direct. "Danny," he never used my first name, "you don't have to do this." And here's the thing about that moment, the thing I've thought about 100 times since then, turned it over and looked at it from different angles. He was right. I didn't have to do it. Nobody was ordering me to do it. There was no regulation that said Logistics Corporal Danny Reyes was the answer to this problem. There were protocols for exactly this kind of task gap, and those protocols did not involve me. But here's what I said. "I know." And then the window's closing. "Tell me what I need to know." He talked me through it for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I counted afterward, going back through the transmission logs. 11 minutes of Caleb Wren, lying somewhere in the dark with a broken collarbone and a fractured scapula, putting every piece of operational knowledge he had into the clearest, most organized verbal briefing I have ever received before or since. He described the rifle. He described the position. He walked me through his range cards point by point, the specific landmarks, the wind indicators, the elevation adjustments he'd already calculated and documented at each potential engagement distance. He told me about a flat rock on the left side of the hide that he'd been planning to use to brace his non-firing arm. He told me the trigger had a slightly shorter reset than standard, and I needed to account for that. And then at the end, after all the technical information, he said something that I've carried with me since. "The hardest part isn't the mechanics you can learn. The hardest part is staying slow when everything in you wants to go fast. When the moment comes, you're going to want to rush. Don't. Take the breath. Let it go halfway. Wait for the pause. The pause is real. It happens between heartbeats. You'll feel it." I didn't say anything. "You'll feel it," he said again, quieter, like he was telling himself as much as me. "Copy that," I said. I adjusted the pack on my back. 42 rounds of .338 Lapua Magnum. The weight of them settled against my spine like something that had decided to stay. I started moving toward the elevated position. Behind me, somewhere in the dark, it was Christmas Eve. There are things about moving in the dark that they don't fully prepare you for in training. Not the darkness itself. You train for darkness. You wear night vision, you learn to read terrain by shape rather than detail, you practice moving without light until it starts to feel almost natural. That part I was ready for. What they can't fully simulate is the darkness when the stakes are real. When the darkness isn't a training lane with instructors watching and a controlled scenario with a known endpoint. When it's just you and the terrain and the cold, and the knowledge that the task you've just accepted has a window that is closing by the minute. The approach route to the elevated position was approximately 900 meters. Under normal conditions, moving at a tactical pace, that's maybe 20 minutes. That night, between the ice and the need to avoid the compromised traverse that had taken Wren down, and the weight of the pack, and the fact that I was doing it alone, that 900 meters took me 37 minutes. I know because I was counting. Not consciously at first. It became conscious about halfway up when I realized my brain was running numbers as a way of managing everything else. The cold, the sound of my own breathing, the feeling in my chest that I can only describe as a kind of sustained, low-frequency alarm, not panic, not quite, but the body's way of saying this is not routine, this is not routine, this is not routine. The eastern route around the compromised section added about 200 meters and took me through a stand of bare trees that rattled against each other in the wind. The sound of them was strange, like something nervous. I moved through them without my torch, using the NVGs, watching the ground for ice patches that would look darker than the surrounding snow. I fell once. Just once. And not badly. My left knee hit the ground and I caught myself with both hands, and the pack swung forward and I had about half a second of pure adrenaline where my only thought was the rounds. The rounds before I got myself back upright and checked, and everything was fine. But I stayed on one knee in the dark for a moment after that, just breathing, letting the adrenaline pass through and out rather than trying to outrun it. Stay slow when everything wants to go fast. I stood up and kept moving. The elevated position was a natural hide, a rocky outcropping on the shoulder of a ridge, with a depression behind the forward edge that provided concealment and a solid rest platform. Wren had identified it days earlier and had visited it twice on reconnaissance. His range cards reflected both visits. I'd seen the position on the map and in his written notes, but seeing it in person, arriving at it in the dark on my hands and knees for the final approach, was a different thing entirely. It was smaller than I'd pictured, tighter. The depression was just deep enough to shelter a person lying prone, with maybe 6 inches of clearance above the back of your helmet if you kept low. The flat rock he'd mentioned was exactly where he described it, left side, roughly the size of a large hardcover book, positioned naturally like it had been placed there on purpose, which it hadn't. The rifle was cached there, wrapped and sealed. I opened the cache, checked the weapon the way he'd told me, and then lay down in the position and let my body settle into the ground. The cold came up through the earth immediately, through the gear, through the layers, through every insulating principle I was wearing. It had a particular character, that cold, dense, patient, the kind that doesn't make dramatic announcements but simply accumulates until you stop noticing it, which is the point at which it becomes genuinely dangerous. I made a note of it in the back of my mind and filed it under deal with later. I got on the radio, whispered, "Raise at position set." Ortega, copy. Window in approximately 14 minutes. 14 minutes. I had 14 minutes to do everything Wren had spent years learning how to do. I want to tell you what I thought about during those 14 minutes because it matters. It's the part of the story that people usually skip over because it's less cinematic than the action itself, but I think it's actually the heart of it. I thought about Caleb, Wren's daughter. Her name was Lily, 7 years old. He'd shown me the photo just once briefly, the way you show someone something that matters too much to show casually. She was gap-toothed in the photo, mid-laugh about something, wearing a purple jacket. She had her father's eyes, that same quality of stillness, even in a photo of a laughing child. The kind of eyes that see things. It was Christmas Eve. I don't know if Wren had thought about that when he was making his approach before the fall. I don't know if he'd had any version of this thought. It's Christmas Eve and Lily is asleep or trying to sleep, and Margaret is probably doing the last of the wrapping. Or whether he'd managed to put all of that into a separate compartment the way experienced operators learn to do. I only know that I thought about it, that it arrived in my mind and settled there alongside everything else. I also thought about what he'd said during those 11 minutes on the radio. Not the technical parts, those were filed and organized and I was accessing them already, running through the range card data, finding my reference points through the scope, building the picture. I thought about the way his voice had sounded, the pain underneath the professionalism, the absolute, careful care he'd taken to give me everything he could, from wherever he was lying in the dark, hurt and grounded and unable to do the thing he'd prepared to do. He'd handed me the task the way you hand someone something fragile and important, not reluctantly, not the way you hand something over when you have no choice. The way you hand something over when you've decided, in the space of a moment, that the person in front of you can be trusted with it. I didn't want to let him down. That's the honest truth of it. There was duty in what I was doing. I understood the operational significance. I understood the stakes. But underneath all of that, driving it in a way I couldn't have anticipated, was the simpler, more human thing. I didn't want to let Ren down. The scope picture at night, with the NVGs and the thermal overlay on the optic, is something I'd only briefly experienced before. It turns the world into a different kind of visual language, shapes and heat signatures, gradients of light and dark that don't correspond to anything your daylight brain is used to processing. You learn to read it. You build a new vocabulary for what you're seeing. I found my reference points one by one, working through the range card notes from memory, and from the laminated card I tucked inside my glove. Landmark Alpha, the angular rock formation at approximately 430 meters. Check. Landmark Bravo, the lone tree with the split trunk at approximately 610 meters. Check. Wind indicator, the snow surface. Light granulation moving left to right, consistent with the notation on the range card. Estimated 5 to 7 kilometers per hour quartering headwind. The card had a correction for this. I said it. Temperature -11 Celsius based on the unit reading on my equipment. The card had a correction for this too. I said it. The flat rock under my left forearm was cold through my glove but steady. Absolutely steady. I understood why Ren had noted it specifically. It was the kind of support that you can feel the quality of, even in the dark. Something that is simply solid in a way that inspires a confidence disproportionate to its size. I found the stillness. I didn't expect to. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't approaching this with any confidence that I was going to find the professional stillness that years of training build in a person. I was a logistics specialist on the wrong end of a gap that should have been filled by someone else, and I knew it. But there's something that happens when you have prepared thoroughly, and you are in the position, and the work is in front of you, and there is nothing left to do but the work. Some part of the noise in your head goes quiet, not all of it, but enough. I settled into the scope. I breathed. I waited. At 6 minutes past the window opening, the target presented. I won't describe the target. I won't describe the nature of the engagement. Some of that information remains sensitive, and some of it simply doesn't belong in this telling, because this story is not really about the target. It was never about the target. What I will tell you is that the moment Ren had described, the pause between heartbeats, was real. I hadn't fully believed him, not because I doubted him, but because it's the kind of thing that sounds poetic, the kind of phrasing that might be real for someone with his training and his years and his specific neurological architecture, but might not translate to someone without those things. It sounded like something you had to earn. But it was there. In the silence inside the trigger brake, in the fraction of a second before I completed the pressure, there was a pause. Not a manufactured pause, not a conscious decision to pause. An actual biological stillness. The heart between beats. The lungs between exhale and inhale. The pause is real. I stayed in it. And then I completed the trigger brake. The sound of a .338 Lapua Magnum at night is something that lives in your body for a while afterward. It's not just the noise, though the noise is significant, even through hearing protection, a kind of hard, flat, concussive wave that hits your chest as much as your ears. It's the recoil. The way the rifle moves and you move with it, and then you're already working the bolt and getting back on the scope, because you need to assess, and Ortega is already on the radio asking for my report, and the thermal picture is shifting, and Ray's report. I made the assessment, I gave the report. I will tell you that the assessment was positive, that the task was completed, that the window closed correctly and the operational picture resolved the way it was supposed to. I will tell you that I lay in that position for another 4 minutes, which is protocol, which is what you do regardless of the outcome while the area is being assessed. And during those 4 minutes, I stared through the scope at a thermal picture that was going still, and I felt the cold coming up through the earth, and somewhere very far away in a completely different kind of world, it was Christmas Eve. 4 minutes is a long time. When I got the all clear and started the movement back down the ridge, the weight of the pack was different. I only had one round left in it. The others were in the magazine minus the one I'd fired, but the weight felt different anyway. Not lighter, not heavier exactly, just changed. Like something had shifted in the physics of it, not the mass but the significance, the density of meaning. I'm aware that sounds strange. I'm telling you anyway because it's true. About halfway back down the slope, moving through the rattling trees again, I got a transmission on the radio. Not Ortega. The voice was rougher than Ortega's, strained. There was pain in it that it was trying to be professional about and not quite succeeding. Ren. Raise a pause, the kind of pause that has a lot of things in it. Report. Task complete, I said. 1 round expended, returning to secondary position. Another pause, longer. Copy that. His voice was, I don't have the right word for what it was. Not relieved exactly. Not proud exactly. Something that existed in the space between those two things that maybe doesn't have a precise name. Raise. Yeah. Good shot. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was moving through the trees in the dark on Christmas Eve with 41 rounds on my back and 1 in the magazine, and the cold getting into everything. Thank you for the range cards, I said finally. They were thorough. He made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been pain, or knowing Ren, was probably both. The transmission ended. I kept moving down the slope toward the lights of the secondary position, which were small and warm in the dark below me, and I thought about a 7-year-old girl named Lily with her father's eyes, and I thought about a photo tucked into the inside cover of a paper notebook, because paper you have to actually burn. And I kept moving, because that's what you do.